Hey guys, my name's Scott. I'm going to be doing my Indigenous Studies 100 project on the Maori of New Zealand. I'm going to start out by talking about giving a little bit of background of the Maori, then talking about their culture, then talking about contact and colonization by the English, and then talking about Maori resistance to colonization, and then I'm going to try and bring it uh, into the present and see how that has kind of continued to some degree to today. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching. Okay, so in this first slide, you can see the Maori flag on the left and the New Zealand flag on the right. Maori people inhabit what is present-day New Zealand and Australia. The current population is 700,000 in New Zealand and 140,000 in Australia. Most live in the North Island, nearly a quarter in the Auckland region, and then the Waikato region has 14% and the Bay of Plenty has 11.5%. Traditionally, they inhabited both North and South Islands, although the North Island more densely. The Maori speak Te Reo, and in Te Reo, Maori means ordinary, normal, or natural people. The Maori refer to themselves as Tangata Whenua, which means people of the land. So, traditionally, the Maori hunted and gathered, as well as fished and practiced horticulture. They enjoyed a varied diet, which included fish, seals, shellfish, eels, and whales, as well as different species of birds. And they grew and cultivated as many as 36 different varieties of plants, including yams, taro, which is the bottom picture, kumara, which is the top, and flax. Maori have and had many diverse artistic practices, including haka, which is a form of posture dancing used in different social functions and contexts. One of those contexts is in the meeting of other groups, as well as also there was a specific haka in the context of war. Another artistic practice is tomoko, or tattooing, which was used to signify a person's genealogy or waka papa, tribal affiliations, status, and achievements. And you can see a gentleman there with tomoko on his face. Traditionally, there were carvers who made elaborate waka, or canoes, as well as ornaments, jewelry, musical instruments, tools, meeting houses, and weapons out of greenstone, wood, or bones. And among artists, there was a special class called Tahungas, who were practitioners of the arts who were considered to have a special religious connection, and their status was achieved through the distribution of the goods they produced to others within a hapu, or sub-tribe. And then on this next slide, we can see a waka with, it's very elaborately made, and then also a meeting house below it that's pretty fancy. Just interesting to see. An iwi, or tribe, was the largest social unit outside of larger military alliances, but the main unit of social organization was the hapu, or sub-tribe, which was made up of interrelated whenua, or extended family groups. Hapus functioned as an economic unit, cultivating land and or fishing together. There were three main groups within Maori society that can be broadly understood as classes: rangatira, chiefs; ware, commoners; and torakatera, or slaves. And slaves were people taken captive during war, but they were allowed to marry free people, and their children would be considered free. Rangatira of various hapu were considered equal, but some hierarchy did exist in terms of status, with the most senior being called Ariki, and those would be chiefs who received special status through the belief that their ancestry conferred prestige or mana. Rangatira breaks down into the words ranga, which means to weave, and tira, which means the group. And it gives you an idea that leadership was about one's obligations to the greater group. First contact occurred in 1642 when Abel Tasman arrived, and due to conflict, the next contact wouldn't be made until 1769 when James Cook, a British explorer, arrived, and that's a picture of Cook right there. After Cook arrived, whaling ships and traders appeared along the coast of New Zealand, and over the next 60 years, contact grew, with the majority of the encounters being peaceful, although tensions sometimes did arise. Even before colonization began, contact with Europeans had negative effects on the Maori population, and one of the largest of those negative effects was the Musket Wars. The Musket Wars were a decades-long intertribal war that was made possible by muskets via the new trade relationship with European traders. Thousands of Maori died during the Musket Wars. Entire tribes were decimated. Huge numbers of people, thousands of people, had to flee their lands, and lots of traditional territories were changed. Simultaneously during this period, many Maori died from introduced diseases, and this was even before the official start of colonization. In 1840, under pressure from missionaries already in New Zealand, the British Colonial Office sent William Hobson to New Zealand to annex part of it, with the intention to set up treaty and get chiefs to consent to British sovereignty. His alleged goal was to bring law to a lawless region. Hobson had missionaries draft the Treaty of Waitangi that he presented to 40 Maori chiefs who initially signed it, and by the end of 1840, 500 chiefs had signed it. They were promised the same rights and privileges as British subjects, but they had different understandings of concepts such as the sale of land and several other things, as well as there were two different versions of the treaty. There was an English one, which declared that the English had sovereignty, and a Maori one. And in the Maori one, the language simply expressed that the Maori accepted English governance, but the Maori were to keep sovereignty over their lands. Shortly after the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, Hono Heke, a rangatira who was one of the original signatories of the treaty, chopped down the British flag multiple times as an act of protest because he believed that the Maori had lost their country and status, and this small act of resistance led to the broader resistance of the Maori, as well as the catalyst of the Northern War, which was the first of several conflicts in the New Zealand Wars, which spread across the North Island for the next several decades. And the importance of the New Zealand Wars is that they were primarily fought as British troops wanted to open up more areas of land for settlers, while simultaneously the Maori were increasingly resistant to sell land, as well as resistance to the increasing numbers of settlers in New Zealand. Simultaneous to the broad resistance of the Maori expressed in the New Zealand Wars, a more specific way that resistance was expressed was in the birth of the Maori King movement. And the Maori King movement was based on the idea that the Maori needed to have their own monarch that would allow them to engage with the British in an equal way. and that in order to fight pressure to sell, they would unite their tribes and place their lands under the protection of a Maori king. And in 1856, Te Wero, who had not signed the Treaty of Waitangi, became the first Maori king. Unfortunately, the electing of the first Maori king led to the continuation of the New Zealand Wars, as British forces continued to attempt to gain access to further land, and they saw the king movement as a direct threat to British monarchy. Eventually, peace was made, and the New Zealand government punished many Maori tribes by confiscating their land, but the King movement still continues to this day. Additionally, an unofficial way that resistance took form was Maori would often pull up survey pegs, destroy roads and fences, and occupy lands, as well as removing surveyors. So, just as a reiteration of earlier points, the after effects of the initial period of colonization were the loss of land, which during this period of the 1800s, the vast majority of Maori land was lost. And in losing this land, Maori people lost access to traditional food sources, displacement happened on a large scale, and death through introduced diseases took a substantial toll on the Maori population, declined by as much as 40%. Additionally, there was the loss of culture as an impact of early colonization because of mission schools, which were schools that were intended to uh, essentially take traditional Maori culture away from children and introduce them and assimilate them into Christianity. Maori resistance to colonization by no means ended in the 19th century, though, as in the 60s and 70s, Maori organizations took influence from the American Civil Rights Movement as well as broader Indigenous struggles. And since 1971, regular protests have occurred on Waitangi Day. In 1975, a march of 5,000 protesters presented the Prime Minister with a petition requesting for all tribal lands to remain in Maori possession, as well as an end to the sale of Maori land. As a consequence of this, the Waitangi Tribunal was created, and its aim is to investigate breaches of treaty, which now includes historical land claims dating back to 1840. The establishment of the Waitangi Tribunal has led to the returning of Maori fisheries, which were supposed to be protected under the original treaty. And another facet of Maori resistance and progress in the modern day is that Te Reo has gone from being a language that was suppressed to now Te Reo is undergoing a resurgence where it's taught in language learning centers, and it's since become an official language of New Zealand, and this has culminated in renaming many places with Maori names. So their resistance has had some positive effects, and there has been some progress with regard to the negative impacts of the past.